Night has fallen over a hamlet at the edge of a black forest. Every shutter is closed, every door bolted. Smoke curls from hearths, but no one stirs outside. Dogs refuse to bark. Chickens roost in silence, and even the wind seems to hold its breath. Somewhere in the darkness, hooves crunch on frozen leaves, but no horse follows. Something moves between the houses, thirsting, unseen. Not a man, not a beast, a hunger wearing a shape. It leaves no footprint you can follow, only a cold pressure on the chest of the dreaming, a sudden pallor in the morning, a body gone slack and blue before dawn. Long before the word vampire was whispered in candlelit parlors, demonologists wrote of the restless dead. They called them revenants, spirits too angry to stay buried. They called them strigoi, shadow drinkers who clawed from graves to drain the living. They called them aswang, winged things that slid through thatched roofs to lap blood from sleepers. To understand the vampire, we must go back before coffins and capes, back to the demon that drank life itself. In the Europe of the Middle Ages, death was never far. Plague swept through villages like wildfire. Wars bled kingdoms dry. Even in years of peace, hunger hollowed out entire families. Every churchyard was heavy with fresh soil, every village haunted by grief. And with so much death came one terrible question. What if the dead refused to stay in their graves? To the medieval mind, the boundary between the living and the departed was fragile. A soul that left the world in sin, without absolution, or by unnatural violence, might not find its way to heaven. Some whispered that such spirits did not merely linger, they rose. They crawled back, hollow, ravenous, and thirsty for the lifeblood of those they once knew. Burial customs became weapons against this fear. Bodies were laid with stones pressed into their mouths, iron spikes through their chests, or even bound in their coffins with ropes, not to honor the dead, but to trap them. For if they escaped the earth, they could become revenants, walking corpses, and worse, blood drinkers. The church condemned these tales as superstition, but it also feared them. Priests wrote in edicts that revenants were not wandering souls, but infestations of demons. If a corpse stirred in its grave, it was Satan's hand animating it. And if villagers claimed to see pale shapes feeding on their kin, the church declared it proof of the devil at work. This was not the vampire of novels and theater. There were no elegant capes, no castles in moonlight. These were demons in rotten flesh, scratching at the edge of the village, gnawing at its children, feeding on its fear. Before vampires had fangs, they had roots in demonology, and those roots grew deep in the soil of dread. But the fear of the restless dead did not stay in whispered tales around a fire. It crept into the ink of scholars, priests, and inquisitors. By the late Middle Ages, demonology had become a formal discipline, a grim catalog not only of tempters and deceivers, but of feeders, spirits that drained the life from the living, soul by soul, drop by drop. In Romania, they called it the Strigoi, a name echoing the Latin strix, the screech owl, once a bird of ill omen. The Strigoi was described as a spirit first and a body only later, a shade that could slip from its grave at night, stalk the living, and feed on their blood or their vitality. Villagers spoke of them as neighbors whose sins had drawn a darker force back into their flesh. To the church, this was not mere haunting, but evidence of a pact. The devil had claimed their souls and animated their remains as his emissaries. Far to the south in Greece, the same shadow wore another name, the Vrikolakas, not a noble vampire of romance, but a swollen corpse, ruddy with stolen blood, pounding at doors or sitting upon the chests of sleepers until they suffocated. Orthodox priests wrote of these creatures in the margins of their homilies, debating which rites might stop them: exorcism, decapitation, burning, because in their eyes this was not simply a spirit gone astray, but a demonic occupation of a body. And in the misty Germanic lands, a still more grotesque image arose: the Nachtzehrer, literally the after-devourer. This being did not even need to leave its grave. It fed from within, chewing its own burial shroud, its hunger transmitted like a plague to the living family above. Folks said if the Nachtzehrer could be heard gnawing underground, someone in the household would soon die. Priests declared it a sign that hell itself had made a contract with the corpse. Across these regions, the pattern is the same: a soul unquiet, a body still animated, a hunger that is more than hunger, a hunger that is hell's. These were not, in the language of the church, undead in the pagan sense. They were infested, possessed, or instrumenta diaboli, instruments of the devil. Every attack was read as evidence of a bargain already struck, a claim already filed in the infernal ledger. These were not just corpses, they were contracts, the devil's claim on a soul. The chronicles of priests may read like dry lists, but in the villages their ink was blood and fire. Across the fields of Eastern and Central Europe, stories spill out of parish records and into night air. The sun sets, bells toll, and neighbors gather with shovels and torches, whispering the name of the one who won't stay buried. In a Carpathian hamlet, a family wakes each night to find their livestock dead and their children feverish. An old woman mutters the word, Strigoi. Before dawn, a mob heads to the churchyard. They dig until the spade strikes wood. The coffin is lifted, lid pried open. Inside lies a body too fresh, lips ruddy as though stained. A stake of hawthorn is raised. A prayer is murmured. The wood plunges down. Some say a groan escapes. The heart is cut out and burned, its smoke thought to break the devil's hold. In the Bavarian hills, another custom takes shape. Villagers speak of the Nachtzehrer, the after-devourer. They say you can hear it under the earth chewing its own shroud. To silence it, they drive nails into its skull or wedge bricks between its jaws so it cannot gnaw its way through the living. These rites are performed as solemnly as an exorcism. The corpse is treated like an object under possession, not merely an animated husk. Further east, in Transylvanian folktales, the distinction blurs between the living witches who become vampires and the dead revenants who claw back to the world. Some were said to leave their bodies at night as shadows, returning at dawn, their nails black with soil. Others rose bodily from the grave, bloated with stolen life, and could be killed only with decapitation and fire. The same gestures repeat: stakes, nails, cutting out hearts, scattering seeds, so the revenant must stop to count each grain until sunrise. Every act echoes the liturgy of an exorcism, commanding, restraining, purifying. In the eyes of these communities, the vampire was not just a monster, but a case of demonic infestation. The grave itself had become a doorway that needed sealing. And as these fires smoldered and the ashes scattered on midnight winds, another truth crept in. Europe was not alone in its blood-drinking demons. Beyond the Carpathian ridges and misted churchyards, the night has its own predators. Sailors and missionaries who carried the cross eastward also carried tales of Europe's vampires. only to find older, darker stories waiting for them. In the steaming jungles and coastal villages of the Philippines, elders whispered of the aswang. By day, it walks as neighbor or market seller. By night, it sheds its human guise and sprouts wings like a bat's, a tongue long and hollow as a reed, snaking through shutters to drink life from a sleeping body. This is no elegant aristocrat of a Gothic novel. This is hunger with claws and a beating heart. Colonial priests called it a vampire, but locals had always known it as a demon. In the burning plains of India, a pale figure appears in travelers' tales, the churl. She is said to be the restless soul of a wronged woman, but she does not linger for revenge alone. With backwards feet and hair like a living net, she lures men and children alike into the dark, draining their essence until they collapse like emptied skins. For missionaries, she became another proof of vampirism. For villagers, she was something older, a spirit corrupted, a warning about the imbalance of life and death. Farther north, behind the red gates of Chinese graveyards, leaps the jiangshi, the stiff corpse. Its limbs are locked. It moves in dreadful hops, feeding not on blood, but on qi, the life breath itself. Taoist priests ward it off with paper talismans, bells, and peachwood swords. To European observers, the jiangshi was quickly labeled a Chinese vampire, but its roots reached deep into demonology, a corpse animated not by its own will, but by a force that should never touch the living. These are only 3 names among dozens: Penanggalan, Pontianak, Layak. Each appears in a different climate, a different religion, yet they share the same nocturnal appetite and the same liminal nature. Neither ghost nor human, but a presence that violates the boundary between worlds. When colonial chroniclers wrote them down, they folded them into the single word vampire, erasing their unique textures, but amplifying their terror. Different lands, different names, yet the same hunger in the dark. If blood drinkers could be found from Manila to Madras, what bound them together in the minds of Europe's demonologists was not just their hunger, but their origin. These creatures, said the preachers, were not born of chance or misfortune. They were made, recruited into a dark service. In sermons and hand-copied treatises, priests called them Satan's harvesters, souls who had signed a contract with the Prince of Darkness. One drop of blood, one whispered vow, and the devil marked them as his collectors, roaming by night to weaken the faithful and claim their souls. Others spoke of curses, a sinful life so black it let hell seep in after death, animating the body as a feeder on its own village. Still others called it a form of possession, a demon borrowing the flesh of the dead to feast by proxy. Court records from Poland to Alsace show the same words echoing across decades. Witches who were also accused of nocturnal feeding, of draining infants, of flying by night with blood demons. In some districts, the word vampire never appeared at all. It was simply another face of the sorcerer, another proof of a pact with the enemy. One 17th century sermon thundered that the witch and the vampire are one shadow, 2 mouths of the same devil. This belief transformed the vampire from a folk revenant into a spiritual contagion, a warning that sin could outlive death and spread like a plague. It was not merely a corpse rising from its grave, it was a soul still serving hell, using the body as a tool to drink life and faith from its neighbors. And if such a creature existed, half human, half contract, how could the living defend themselves? Steaks and garlic would not be enough. It would take ritual, prayer, and sometimes fire to end the pact. From theology to practice, how to fight a demon that wears a corpse. Once the vampire had been reimagined as a servant of hell rather than a mere wandering corpse, the remedies against it also became spiritual warfare. To strike at the revenant was to strike at the demon that animated it. Villagers gathered at dawn with hammers and stakes, not out of superstition, but with the solemnity of a rite, a grim exorcism conducted with wood and iron instead of incense and psalms. In the forests of Poland and the Balkans, burial mounds were reopened when sickness spread. The suspected corpse would be staked through the heart or the stomach to nail it to the earth, a physical pinning of the spirit. In some regions, the head was severed and buried apart from the body, or the mouth stuffed with bricks, coins, or thorns so that no more blood could pass its lips. Hearts were burned to ash and mixed into water as a grim prophylactic for the living, a last, desperate measure to drink the demon out of the village. Alongside these brutal measures came sacred ones. In Catholic regions, holy water and blessed salt were sprinkled on graves. Fragments of the true cross or relics of saints were pressed to the suspected body. Special prayers were whispered. Not only the Lord's Prayer, but local invocations said to drive out unclean spirits. In Orthodox communities, bells were rung at funerals to confuse revenants, and iron objects were placed across thresholds and cradles, echoing far older pagan customs. East and West each had their variations, but the goal was the same: to sever the link between flesh and the parasite inhabiting it. Where a Western priest might bring a reliquary to the grave, a Romanian villager might scatter poppy seeds, so the vampire would be forced to count them until sunrise. Where a Greek islander burned incense and sealed a body with wax, a Bulgarian might hammer nails into the skull. These were not random acts, but a folk liturgy, blending pre-Christian charms with Christian exorcism. Every charm was a question whispered into the dark. Could faith, ritual, or iron pin down a hunger older than death itself? Every charm was a question. Could faith pin down a hunger older than death? But fear does not stay fixed. As centuries turned, the specter crawling from the grave began to change its shape in the European imagination. By the early 1700s, whispers of revenants were no longer confined to rural graveyards. They reached the desks of generals and monarchs. Austrian officials in occupied Serbia wrote dispatches describing villagers staking corpses. Medical men penned treatises on vampirism as though it were a disease. Newspapers printed stories of the dead rising to drain the living. Europe was in the grip of what scholars later called the vampire craze. Yet while these reports turned blood drinking into an official problem, writers began to do something stranger. They gave the creature a title. In 1819, John Polidori published The Vampire, and for the first time, the vampire stepped into a salon instead of a graveyard. No longer a bloated peasant's corpse, it became a fallen nobleman, pale, elegant, predatory in manners as well as appetite. Half a century later, Bram Stoker crowned him Count Dracula, a Gothic aristocrat moving through candlelight and castle halls. The devil's contagion translated into the language of seduction, disease, and immortality. The devil faded from the center of the tale. Gone were the pacts and sermons of Satan's harvesters. In their place stood an ambiguous anti-hero, cursed yet alluring, damned yet immortal. The vampire's hunger still hinted at plague, sexuality, and the terror of invasion, but its form was refined, clothed in silk and candlelight. The grimoire's demon had become a romantic predator, still carrying the echo of the old shadow, but now able to look you in the eye and smile. Yet, even in silk and candlelight, the old demon still lurks beneath. And so the journey comes full circle. What began as a demon of hunger, a shadow at the window, a corpse that would not stay buried, now walks in velvet, gliding through fiction, film, and our collective imagination. Yet beneath the aristocratic mask, the same ancient pattern waits: blood, breath, vitality stolen in the dark. The vampire is no longer only a monster, it is a mirror. In every era, it has reflected what people feared most: disease, invasion, sin, forbidden desire, and what they secretly wished for: power over death, a body that never decays, a hunger that never ends. To trace its roots in demonology is to see how myth and theology entwine, how nightmares become names, how names become legends. But how much of that old demon still lingers? When you watch a vampire on screen, are you looking at a gothic count, or the ghost of a belief that once sent villagers into graves at midnight with stakes and prayers? Which vision chills you more, the demon that wore a corpse or the count that wears a smile? Tell us in the comments below. Your thoughts and your stories might shape a future episode. And if you're drawn to these descents into history's darkest myths, subscribe and join us, because every legend we unearth has deeper roots, and the night still holds more names.